All right, President Trump may be starving out China's Xi Jinping with the tariffs. Joining us now is a great friend of mine, former Trump Deputy National Security Advisor, Matt Pottinger. First of all, Matt, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for doing this.
Hey, Larry, how are you?
We appreciate this very, very much. One of the headlines today, tough talking China could be opening the door to tariff talks. And as you probably know, as a China expert, they're closing factories in China at a record rate. Their exports are way down. I mean, you know, we're their biggest customer. And at least for the moment, with 145% tariffs, we've kind of shut off business with them. Now, what do you think they're going to do? How do you read this, Matt Pottinger?
Yeah, so Larry, you're right. Look, China, about 20% of their exports go to the United States. So they really do need this market. And by the way, the older elements of their market, the older elements of their economy that used to carry that economy are not working very well. Their real estate market is a mess. Their consumer economy is, people are scared to spend, and that's been true for years now. Foreign direct investment has fallen over the last couple of years. So they need their export markets more than ever, and the United States is the most important single market for them. So where does this end? I noticed that the Chinese minister in charge of trade had his spokesman put out a statement that seemed like a slightly softer statement overnight than the one that we'd heard a week or two ago. A week or two ago, they said President Trump would have to remove his unilateral tariffs, as they called them, as a precondition for talks. Now they're saying they would like President Trump to show sincerity that he would be prepared to remove tariffs. So I think that we're finding our way fumbling toward some kind of a negotiation in coming weeks. And I imagine there will be some kind of a mutual de-escalation. That's my best guess. But we're not going back. I just don't see President Trump going back to his pre-inauguration level of tariffs. He's going to maintain particularly high tariffs for China throughout his presidency.
You remember well, Matt, you know, for 2.5 years, we negotiated with China on the so-called Phase 1 deal, okay? Lighthizer was our leader, Mnuchin, myself, Wilbur Ross, et cetera, We signed that thing in January 2020 amidst way too much ballyhoo. And it turns out, by most accounts, China never lived up to that Phase 1 deal, okay? They're still stealing intellectual property. They're still forcing technology transfers. They're not buying the commodities, either the manufacturing, even the farm stuff. In other words, they didn't make good on the deal. So I think, and I hope President Trump remains very tough with them because, you know, memories are long. And that memory of that deal is very disappointing. You think that we're going to just jump in and say, I mean, there's people on Wall Street that want us to have, you know, go back to zero tariffs with China. Why should we do that? I don't think we should do that.
Yeah, no, well, I'm with you on that. I would say that the great innovation of that deal that President Trump and Bob Lighthizer and Steve Mnuchin and you were all involved in supporting the president in that Phase 1 agreement. The thing that was great about that agreement was it was the first time that the United States maintained these punitive tariffs as part of the deal. So in other words, the tariffs would not come off until China had made good on it. So that was a real innovation. But of course, even with that innovation, Beijing did not make good on its word, and that's because it's a communist party. You know, communist dictators don't usually keep their word, and I think President Trump knows that.
And everybody tells me Xi Jinping has ever more control over the country, over the economy, over the Communist Party. People say he thinks he's emperor. He thinks he's even bigger than Mao Zedong. What is your impression of what's going on there?
Yeah, look, I mean, he's been in power now for 13 years. I don't think he's leaving power unless it's for his own funeral. And so we've got a long time to go potentially with Xi Jinping. But I think he's out of touch, right? I mean, if you're in a system where you don't have to worry about voters, you don't have to worry about polls, you know, there's no Fox News equivalent, that he's watching on TV. He controls everything more or less that gets broadcast or even what is permitted to carry on the internet. So I think he's out of touch. When you get into that rarefied air, it's like being on the summit of Mount Everest. The oxygen gets pretty thin, and I don't think he's fully grasping all the dimensions of how his own economic policy, centralizing control into the hands of the Communist Party, into his own hands, how much damage that's done when you're dealing with 1.3 billion human beings, right? You can't control successfully what 1.3 billion people do.
I mean, he's wrecked their economy. He's basically wrecked their economy, right? Not so 20 years ago, 30 years ago, all those free market reforms, most of that stuff is off the boards. He's using all this, money, government money, for these state-owned companies and squeezing the entrepreneurs out. In fact, throwing some entrepreneurs into jail. Matt Pottinger, let me raise one more point. We talked about this yesterday. Trump administration is now putting secondary sanctions on Iranian oil purchases. Their biggest financier, as you know, is China. China, I think the number was China, 90% of Iranian oil was purchased by China. So secondary sanctions, which says you cannot do any business with the United States, that's really a slap in the face of China. Does that have any particular meaning in this? It hurts Iran. I'm glad about that, but it may hurt China, too.
Well, I'll tell you something. First of all, it's a return to President Trump's maximum pressure strategy, which I think was the right policy then, and it's the right policy now. The Biden years, the Middle East policy of the Biden administration was particularly rough going and unproductive. So this is setting the stage for President Trump to potentially see if Iran's willing to put anything on the table. I would only add that Iran isn't much better at keeping its end of deals than the Chinese are, the Chinese Communist Party is. But I will say this idea of secondary sanctions on China is a really, really powerful one in another context, Larry. And that is that the sanctions that the United States has on Russia right now are actually very, very important because they ensure that Chinese banks don't tie up even more closely with the Russian financial system.
So they're
afraid of secondaries.
Right. So that could be a huge card. And the mineral deal puts us with really in Ukraine. American companies developing in Ukraine has got to be some kind of security buffer zone, unless Putin is truly out of his mind, which maybe he is. I don't know. You know more about that than I do. But I see the mineral deal as a big plus. Give you the last word on that one.
I like it. It shows that the United States has a stake now. I mean, it will help satisfy President Trump's desire to always be reimbursed for support the United States provides to friends and allies. So, look, President Trump's made a very generous offer to Vladimir Putin. If Vladimir Putin would rather not have peace, if he really wants Ukraine, not peace, and that's where I think Putin is, then now we have that information, and President Trump can adjust accordingly.
All right, terrific stuff. Former National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger. Matt, I hope you come back. It's great to see you, my friend.
You too.
All right,
see you soon.
Take care.